land cover for pervious landscapes within these urban environments. But then it's also a major economic boost to the United States. So this is a little older. It's 2002. There hasn't been many updates on revenue generated, but previously in 2002, the total revenue was almost $58 billion. And so when they're factoring in total revenue, they're factoring in sod farms, lawn care services, equipment, golf courses, etc. So you can see it's a big industry within the United States, and this is continuing to grow. And so it's not shrinking. The industry is growing as we get more urban areas. There's more lawn care services. And so this trend of turfgrass related income is growing and not minimizing. I will say when I'm talking about all these benefits, this is assuming that we're having, healthy growing grass. It's not, mismanaged. And so just general overview, if we want a healthy turf grass, there's a few main components. One of the biggest one is turf grass selection. I could give a whole presentation on all the different grasses, how to select which one for your environment. But having the right grass in the right place, kind of the Florida friendly principles, is one of the major components to getting all these benefits that I'll talk about. The other thing is proper cultural practices. And so if we can get these practices down and do these correctly, you should have a pretty reasonable, easy time getting in a nice, healthy, dense turf grass. So this includes proper mowing, specifically the right mowing height. So I see this a lot where grasses aren't managed at the correct mowing height, and then they have a lot of issues. Another one is proper irrigation. One of the biggest things that we actually see is over irrigation. And so a lot of problems arise if you water too much. And so we do want to have proper irrigation and not just more. Same thing goes with nutrition. We have recommended ranges for all the grasses. If you follow these, you'll have a nice, dense, healthy turf grass. If you don't follow these, that's where we can have some issues. And then there's cultivation. This one isn't talked about as much, but it can help a lot in a lot of scenarios. So this really means things like aerification, thatch management, anything where you're, cultivating or mechanically changing some of that turfgrass properties. If we get all of those things right, our pest management should go down, should be easier, but we always want to follow IPM. So integrated pest management. We don't want to be applying pesticides if we don't need to. So like I said, all of these, if we do these correctly, we'll get a healthy, dense turf, and then you'll get all these benefits that I'm going to lay out here now. So I broke it up into three main categories. We'll start with the environmental and ecological benefits of turfgrass, and then we'll go into the social benefits, and then finally we'll break down more of the economical benefits and actually specifically focus on Florida. So to start off, this is the biggest section. We'll go over the environmental benefits. And so just kind of lay out the background again. So urban development, as you can see in this picture, typically we're growing our plants, so turf grass, landscape plants, all on disturbed urban soils. So the development typically removes all the vegetation, they strip the topsoil, and then they either backfill with whatever they dig up from retention ponds, and then they lay it out, they drive heavy machinery on it, and it compacts that soil. So all of this is a fairly highly disturbed soil, and then we're going to plant things into that soil. So this soil will lack organic matter, soil structure. It's going to increase the bulk density or the compaction of that soil. And then it's also going to reduce the permeability of things like water movement, nutrient movement, air movement. And so with this development, we're really kind of setting ourselves up for a tough scenario. And then in these newer developments, that can lead to increased inputs, but we're doing a lot of research on this and how to alleviate this problem. But we are finding with some research projects that turfgrass is a soil builder. And so a lot of these environments will be covered with sod, the grass will grow, and we're finding about 5 to 10 years with that turf grass, that soil is going to gain a lot of the good properties that it had before the development. So I just want to point out that turf grass is known to be a soil builder. And so it's going to actually develop this soil over time and help alleviate these problems. So one of the benefits of turf grass in these urban environments is stabilization and erosion control of the soil. And so turf grass is highly unique because it has a high shoot and root density. So if you think of a healthy grass, it has a lot of different leaf blades. They're all, compacted. And so they grow tightly together. And then the same goes with their root system. So this is different than taproot systems, which have a primary root. Turfgrass has a really fibrous, dense root system, and so it's very effective at stabilizing soil, and that's why they use grasses on roadways, anything for quick coverage that's going to hold that soil there. Some additional benefits with this soil stabilization is that it's resistant to overland water flow. And so once it gets established, water is going to flow on that and the soil's not going to erode away. It's also going to decrease any runoff. I'll touch on more in just a minute. And then it's going to allow more time for infiltration because it has a dense canopy. That runoff isn't going to move as fast. That water movement's not going to go across the landscape as fast. And so more water can actually go into that soil. So to go along with that, turf is used, on roadways, anything to get quick ground cover. It's also utilized in landfills and abandoned properties. So if you drive along I-95, I'm sure most of us have seen it. They have big landfills there and they end up growing grass on top of that landfill when it's done. So you can see in the picture here that we have turf holding that ground together in this landfill site. And they do this once again to stabilize the soil, prevent erosion, kind of cap off that landfill. And then with that, it's also going to provide dust control because it is holding that ground together, that soil together. So to go along with that, I touched on how it has a high root density. So we're going to see benefits in terms of water infiltration and reduced runoff. So with turf grass, since it has a dense fibrous root system, it creates a lot of different diversity of channels. And so the benefit of that in the soil is that it's going to increase that total infiltration in that soil. Those channels are going to allow the rates to flow in different ways, and it's going to saturate more of the soil profile and not just go straight through one channel. So along with this, like I said, since it has a dense canopy, it's got a fibrous root system. The water doesn't move as quick, so it increases the time of that water on the surface. So with that, it's going to allow more water to actually permeate or go into that soil. So it's going to decrease the total surface runoff. They have research. So at the end of this, I have a publication on the turfgrass benefits. If you want to dive in, there's these numbers are off previous studies. But they found the mean runoff value was less than 1% of the total precipitation compared to impervious surfaces, so concrete, when that's with or without trees. So sometimes you see trees, in urban areas that has concrete around it. And then it was also compared to porous pavement. So you can think of a non-living, ground cover that allows the water to penetrate. Turfgrass was more efficient at reducing that runoff. So to keep going on with this, the benefits of water infiltration and runoff. Once again, these are different studies. They're across the United States. So one thing we need to do moving forward is we do need more of these comparative studies. It's just hard to, get enough scenarios or enough collaborators in time to do all these. So I'm pulling this from, different studies across the United States, but a lot of the trends are true across what landscapes you're looking. Turfgrass, when they compared it to prairie vegetation, it actually decreased surface runoff by 54%. And then it also reduced the total phosphorus load off in that runoff by 50%. Since it has a really dense canopy, it's highly effective at assimilating these nutrients that are found within the surface runoff or the soil. And so it actually was able to use that phosphorus before it could run off. So it was effective at reducing the total runoff and the nutrient load in that runoff compared to prairie vegetation. There's another study that looks at, artificial lawns and xeriscaping. So, using rocks and no irrigation. Turfgrass stands have greater water infiltration and retention and less runoff than this artificial lawns and xeriscaping. So artificial lawns, they have a place in urban areas, but that's highly specific. And we believe that living turf grass is going to provide a lot more benefits than an artificial lawn. So some of that is greater water infiltration and retention in that soil, and then also less surface runoff. So beyond infiltration and runoff, we actually look at groundwater recharge. So some of this research has actually been done in Florida itself. But since it has the ability to reduce surface water runoff and increase infiltration, this will all result in greater groundwater recharge. So if we compare turf grass to some other environments, turf grass provides similar. It's a little bit lower than just straight wood chip mulch. And that's because the turf itself is going to use some of that water. But we found that it also has a greater groundwater recharge compared to a pollinator landscape. So this landscape was flowering forbs, and it found that turf was more efficient with groundwater recharge compared to that pollinator landscape. In a different study looking at, once again, prairie versus turf grass, they found that it provides similar groundwater protection and recharge compared to the natural prairie vegetation found around it. So if we have, nice, dense, healthy growing grass, we're getting a lot of these benefits, equal to natural areas or greater than other landscapes that we have. So beyond just the water itself, we also want to factor in on nutrient losses. So this was a big thing in Florida. I believe the study started right around 2008, and this was studied very intensively with UF before I got here. But they found a properly maintained and actively growing turf grass resulted in minimal nutrient loss from leaching and from runoff. And so if that grass is growing, it's healthy, it's dense, there's very minimal nutrients being lost in terms of leaching and runoff. Beyond the just nutrients themselves, they also found that there's very little sediment runoff. We worry about this in different scenarios because our soils have a lot of phosphorus. And so if we get a lot of soil runoff, that makes its way into the water bodies and it pollutes our waterways. So properly maintained and actively growing turf grass results in very little nutrient loss via leaching or runoff. And this is all due to what I've stated before. It has that high root and shoot density. And so you can see in this picture, sometimes in the greenhouse, we'll grow grass in these PVC tubes, and then within it, we'll have a clear tubing. And so we can actually track the rooting. But this photo, I just want to show that, it has just a couple of turf grass blades but you can see some of the rooting here, and then we have a very fibrous root system. And so because it is dense, it's going to assimilate, it's going to take up all those nutrients in that landscape, and we're not going to lose them to the environment itself. So what they found at UF, like I said, if you apply fertilizer within our recommendations at IFAS here, there's negligible or minimal nutrient leaching. And so if you want more about what rates we recommend, we have all this on EDIS publications. We have the state broken up into 3 different regions. So you'd find what region you're in, what grass you're growing, and then we have our nutrient recommendations for that. Additionally, following the best management practices in terms of fertilizer and irrigation. So best management practices in terms of fertilizer, it goes back to the 4 R's of nutrient stewardship, which I have a photo here, but that's the right source. So applying, the right fertilizer, the right nutrient content, the sources. So what slow release, quick release, the right rate. And so we have our recommended rates per application and for the year total. Then we also need to apply them at the right time. And so generally we only want to apply it when it's actively growing. If we don't do that, we'll have issues with potential nutrient loss. And then the right place. That one's pretty straightforward. Apply it just to the turf area that you want fertilized, and be cautious not to, leave fertilizer on impervious surfaces, so sidewalks. All of this helps with balancing our nutrient inputs into this turf grass landscapes. But if we follow all this, we find that nutrient losses from turf grass is actually similar to unmanaged natural areas. So because it's actively growing, it's dense, if we apply our irrigation and our fertility right, our fertilizer, there's minimal nutrient losses, and it's about the same as unmanaged natural systems. So if we do our part, the grass will be effective at taking up nutrients, and we're not going to lose it to the environment. They also found that nitrogen levels in groundwater are not related to the amount of nitrogen applied to the turf grass. So even over applying fertility, if the grass is dense and growing, they found with previous research that there still was minimal nutrient losses to the environment. So moving with this, if we compare it to some other landscapes, turf grass resulted in 92% lower nitrogen, 39% lower phosphorus, and 47% lower potassium leaching compared to mixed species stands. So this was compared to ornamental ground covers, woody shrubs, and trees. And turf grass is more efficient at taking up those nutrients and not allowing them to be leached from that environment. So research here at UF. So here's a photo of, this was taken in Jay, Florida. So Dr. Unruh was doing this research. He was comparing wood chipped areas, pollinator landscapes, and turf grass. And they found that turf grass reduced the nitrogen leaching by 92% relative to the wood chip mulch. So a place that has no landscape, no roots, it makes sense that that mulch will release some nutrients to the environment as it breaks down. Some of the soil has nutrients in it, so if there's no plants growing in it, there's a high likelihood that nutrients will be leached from that system. But even when comparing to a pollinator landscape, so flowering forbs, turf grass is still more efficient at taking up that nutrients, taking up that nitrogen compared to that pollinator landscape. But like I said, this is all in terms of healthy, dense, actively growing grass. If we are applying nutrients to grass that's damaged or it's not growing, that's where we run the risk of nutrients being leached from turf grass. So you can see this photo here, this grass was damaged. If we just broadcast fertilizer over this whole area, there's more likelihood, especially with quick release fertilizers, that nutrients would become soluble, and then with irrigation or rainfall, it could be leached through that system. So all those benefits I was talking about previously, they were using, healthy, dense grass like you see on the right side of the photo. But when you do apply to these damaged areas or to when the grass isn't actively growing, that's where we can see some issues. Another thing that isn't talked about enough, this goes back into the correct turfgrass management, is that over irrigation is probably the main driver of most of the nutrient losses that we see. Um, so if you're over irrigating and then we get our rainy season and it's more water, that's just all leading to a higher likelihood that those nutrients can't be picked up by the plant quick enough and that they could be leached from that turfgrass system. So a lot of it falls on the correct management and having a healthy turfgrass system or a healthy lawn. So in addition to, just straight fertilizer, fertility, another benefit with turfgrass is that it has the ability to utilize and tolerate reclaimed water and low quality water. So it doesn't have to be reclaimed. It could just be from various sources. But turfgrass is generally highly tolerable to different salts if you have the right turfgrass. And it can also handle the nutrient load in our reclaimed water that we see. And then beyond that, like I said, it has good ability to use those nutrients. And so once the turfgrass is established, we see minimal nitrate leaching even when using reclaimed water. So like I said, the nutrients in this water can assimilate into the plant tissue, and this can actually aid in turfgrass growth while removing nitrogen from that water. And so we can actually use it to supplement or lower our total fertility if we are using reclaimed water that has nutrients in it itself. So this photo is just showing some research down in Davie, so at Fort Lauderdale Research Center. These plots were split between using reclaimed water and potable water. And you can see some of these dark squares that I have highlighted here. These are the ones that are being irrigated with reclaimed water. Outside of that is the potable water. You can see it's not as green. It's more of a yellow brown color. So that reclaimed water has nutrients and that turfgrass can use it. So we can use that to actually incorporate into our fertility plan and achieve our turfgrass quality that we're going for. Just like fertility, there are concerns about nitrogen leaching using reclaimed water. And this is mainly if you're using reclaimed water while that turfgrass is still getting established. And so they've found that nitrogen leaching from reclaimed water was higher compared to potable water 30 days after seeding. And this all makes sense. We don't have a root system yet, and it's not dense above ground tissue. And so there's no way for that turfgrass system to actually absorb those nutrients. So you might want to be cautious while we're establishing turfgrass, get it, if you can, change sources. I know a lot of times if you're on reclaimed water, that's the only source you really have. But if you can try to establish grasses right before the rainy season, you can have the rain do a lot of the work for us. And then after that, when we need supplemental irrigation from reclaimed water, we'll have that root system to absorb those nutrients. So here's a big one that gets a lot of debate, and this is carbon sequestration. So really going into, is turfgrass a carbon source? So it means we're actually releasing more CO2 into the environment, or is it a carbon sink? So it's absorbing CO2, greenhouse gases, and it's actually taking that up, which is going to lower the CO2 or the greenhouse gases. So there's been a lot of research done throughout the United States. And in general, there is probably one or two places that they found a kind of a net neutral effect. But the majority of the studies, there's a positive carbon sequestration rate and a positive soil organic carbon accumulation rate. So what that means is that turfgrass systems in general are a carbon sink. So that means they're absorbing more CO2 than they release. And that's even factoring in all of our management practices. So if we factor in all the hidden costs, so mowing emissions like you see in the photo, irrigation, fertilizer, the transportation for the fertilizer, it's still going to assimilate a lot of carbon, put it into its root system, and it's still been found to be a carbon sink even when factoring in our management practices. So this is in general what we're finding with turfgrass, but then the management intensities and lawn age can alter this overall ability to be a carbon sink. So they did find really old lawns, they're talking like 100, 120 years old, that rate really drops down in the carbon sequestration. It's highly established, has a really dense root system already, and so there isn't much in terms of where they can put this extra carbon. But that, like I said, most of us aren't on that old of a landscape, and so turfgrass is actually a carbon sink when we factor in everything. And so they've compared managed turfgrass systems to a lot of different areas. And they found that a managed turfgrass system has greater carbon sequestration, or it takes up more carbon and puts it into the soil compared to grasslands, croplands converted back into a grassland, cover crop scenarios, no-till ag, and then many other agricultural crop systems. So because turfgrass has such a dense root system, when it absorbs that CO2 or that carbon, it puts it into the roots, that stays in the soil and takes a long time to break down. And so it's has a higher sequestration rate compared to all those various scenarios. And then once again, if we follow our best management practices, kind of what I highlighted before, it may reduce the net global warming potential of turfgrass, and that's when compared to non-fertilized turfgrass. And so putting in the right management allows for the turfgrass to produce more biomass, more roots, and so that can actually result in adding more carbon into that soil. So it's a greater carbon sink when we properly manage our turfgrass. So they found and they concluded that turfgrass, particularly in urban areas, is an important contributor to the global carbon sequestration efforts. And so we found out there's a lot of research on this, but if we follow the correct management, our recommendations, turfgrass is a carbon sink for our urban landscape. So it's highly important. There's a lot of focus on this moving forward with global warming. So it's just important to note that turfgrass is a carbon sink and not a carbon source. So beyond that, we do see that turfgrass has an additional benefit, and that's soil remediation. So there's a lot of problems with urban soil. That's different contamination from heavy metals, organic compounds, inorganic compounds. This is all created from, byproducts of urban areas, industrial places, and then it's also created from people, from us. So traffic emissions, our waste, how we dispose of the waste, corrosion of what materials we have in urban environments. And so all of this can pollute the soil where we're trying to grow our plants. So soil remediation is achieved through turfgrass with the plant microbe interaction in the rhizosphere. And so with this, since it has such a dense fibrous root system, there's greater surface area for the microbes and the plant to break down a lot of these contaminants. And then either the turfgrass will actually take up these contaminants into the ground, into their roots and their shoot system, or they'll just be broken down and made into a non problematic compound in the soil. And so when compared to a taproot system, turf grass, as you can see with this dense fibrous root system, was more efficient at remediating the soil compared to that taprooted plant system. And so looking at that further, when they compared turf grass to trees, shrubs, and sedges in a polluted soil, and turf grass had the greatest emergence rate and biomass production. And so with that, that means that turf grass can help break down more of the contaminants. It can absorb some of them. So it has a greater potential to remediate that soil compared to other plant systems. They found that this remediation or bioremediation, it can break down a lot of herbicides that can pollute the soil. Because it has that dense root system, it can also absorb a lot of the nitrogen that's around. And then they even found that it can absorb or break down pharmaceutical contaminants. So turfgrass is very good for remediating a lot of our soils. Like I said before, it's a soil builder. And so it takes a lot of these pollutants and then it makes a more healthy soil structure. They've even compared it to other remediation methods. And with turfgrass, because it's relatively cheap compared to the other methods, they found that it could be a more cost-effective method of remediating soils compared to more traditional methods. So moving along, we've talked a lot about the soil. I'll try to move through this next portion pretty quick so I can get to any questions. But it's also going to improve air quality. So turf grass absorbs everything in the environment, so atmospheric pollutants, CO2, greenhouse gases, and even fine particulate matter it will kind of trap in that canopy. So with that, it's trapping a lot of the pollutants, it's pulling them up, but then it's also producing a lot of oxygen. So overall, it's really going to improve the air quality in these urban systems. In addition to air, it's also going to improve our water because it is one of the best filters that we have. Because once again, that root system, it found that it can decrease anywhere from 64 to 90% of the nitrogen in the water, phosphorus anywhere from 44 to 94%. And a lot of this variability you see in these numbers is just based on what turf grass was being used. Potassium anywhere from 33 to 73%, and then it can even pull up suspended solids by over 90%. Like I said before, it can also reduce, pharmaceuticals. It can reduce hormone pollutants in water runoff. And then you'll see turf grass areas being used a lot in agricultural production as kind of buffer strips. And this is and aims to really reduce that non-point source pollution. So if there's any runoff or that water movement, nutrient movement, it will hit that turf grass buffer strip. The turf grass will use it, and then we'll reduce our total non-point source pollution. Going into temperatures, particularly in urban environments, since turf grass is growing, it's transpiring, it's getting some moisture into that air, and it can actually reduce the heat island effect. And so in urban areas with all the concrete, blacktop, we see that overall it increases that temperature. This photo kind of shows that. It shows the difference between, a park and an urban residential area and so forth. So it has this cooling effect relative to bare soil. It can decrease maximum daytime temperatures. It can reduce the temperature in parks. And then once again, it can reduce the overall temperature compared to dormant grass, synthetic turf, and bare soil. So one of the biggest reasons we really don't like our artificial turf is that it really increases that surface temperature, particularly this time of year. We've seen the surface of synthetic turf or artificial turf can reach up to 150 degrees. I'm not sure if anyone has gone and walked on artificial turf during the heart of the day, but it's extremely hot. So you're not only getting the hot air, you're getting a lot of that heat coming back off that artificial turf. Or if you compare that to natural turf grass, the canopy is a lot cooler. So that's another big comparison between the two. So we'll kind of go over this. Irrigated turf grass can decrease the temperatures within the walls of housing. So with that, it cools kind of that environment around the house, which can save energy and money and improve outdoor thermal comfort. And then there's a few other additional benefits. This is reducing noise pollution, UV reflection, dust, some allergy related pollen. And then they've also found that it can reduce fire hazards, particularly around buildings. So if you have healthy turf grass, a lot of times it can kind of create a barrier in terms of getting that fire getting to the household itself. One main thing, kind of a drawback that people, state a lot is biodiversity, because grass in a lot of areas is a monoculture when it's planted. They think that it can't support a lot of biodiversity, but there is quite a bit of research showing that it does have good biodiversity. It's just different than what we think of other landscapes. Another benefit that we see is that in urban areas, so lawns, golf courses, etc., they also attract certain predatory birds because it actually gives them a landscape to hunt in. So I'll kind of skip this. I'm going to run out of time if I don't. One thing that we are researching is trying different species and cultivar blends. And so this is a picture from a study down in Fort Lauderdale, but they used multiple different St. Augustine grasses and let them grow together, and then tracked what that did in terms of insect populations, weed pressure, and then just overall quality of the lawn. They found that the blends generally were more resilient towards any kind of stress because one of the grasses in that mix could normally handle that stress. So moving beyond the environmental, there's also social and societal benefits. So one of the main benefits is recreational benefits. So you can think of, playing in the park, get-togethers. A lot of times this is going to be done on a turf area. They've even found that park visitors prefer natural grass to artificial turf. And so most cases, turf grass is going to be one of the best suited areas for a lot of these recreational activities. They've also linked some physical and mental health being boosted. So overall improving your physical and mental health with turf grass and green areas. So it can reduce the risk of chronic diseases. It can decrease your blood pressure compared to artificial grass. And it also helps with a lot of mental health issues, everything from depression, can increase relaxation. And so there's a lot of benefits of, these parks, these green areas, this turf grass. And so it's not just environmental, there is physical and mental health benefits also. This slide mainly talks about how natural grass is safer overall than synthetic grass. And it creates a more beneficial thermal environment. So you're not going to get as much heat stress, and it should reduce overall the injury likelihood compared to artificial grass. Another benefit was people that had well-maintained turf grass areas. They improved their sense of safety, and it's also inverse related to the incidence of crime. So having well-managed areas, for whatever reason, the crime rate does go down a little bit compared to other areas. They also provide opportunities for nature-based learning because turf grass is resilient. You can walk on it, you can have gatherings. It's a nice place to have nature-based learning or outdoor learning. And then an additional thing, there's aesthetic benefits. So a lot of times we recommend, using grass as kind of the background to your landscape. It lets other things be featured while you have this nice green ground cover. And so you'll see it, in most of our landscapes, whether it's used for recreation or just as kind of a ground cover to stage your other plants. And then if we go past the social and the environmental benefits, we'll go into economical. So once again, this is kind of what I covered previously. If we just go into golf by itself, it actually has the economic activity of $84 billion in 2016. This is important to Florida because we have the most golf courses in the country. So it employs over 2 million people. And then it also provides a lot of tourism benefits to our areas. Additionally to that, well-maintained landscapes with, healthy landscapes. That includes turf, trees, ornamental plants, increased property value, increases sale prices, and then it also moderates that temperature, which reduces energy costs. So there's a lot of secondary benefits beyond just the environmental benefits. If we talk about Florida specifically, we have about 4 million acres of managed turf in Florida alone. And then 77% of that is actually residential lawns. So residential lawns, the landscape, lawn care industry are the main driver to this turf grass area. And then it's just important. It's important to state why it's such a big deal here in Florida. Florida has been reported to have the largest contribution to turf grass related activity within the whole United States. So turf grass is a huge deal in Florida, and that's why we do so much research on it. But it's the largest contributor to the whole economic activity within the United States. And then another one, just comparing 2016 to 2010, the turf grass industry is continuing to grow, like I mentioned before. So with all the benefits, we still see a lot of, misconceptions, a lot of concerns. So I'll just touch on these quickly to kind of show you what the concerns are. Some of them have been kind of debunked or, there's other material I've already presented on. And then I'll kind of go over, what are some solutions or ways to improve kind of this misconception. So greenhouse gas emission. So like I said, overall, turf grass is a carbon sink, but we still hear a lot of things about greenhouse emissions, specifically because we need to mow it, we need to apply fertilizer. And so it can be a source of greenhouse gases when you factor in these processes, but overall it's still a carbon sink. But when looking at these, there are some solutions and research that we're doing to kind of reducing these emissions. So one is reduce irrigation. So irrigation uses energy to get the water. A lot of times we're over irrigating, and so this can cause emissions from the soil itself. So reducing the irrigation, utilizing slow release fertilizer and fertilizer technology. Overall, reducing nitrogen fertilizer using the lower end of our recommended rates. And then, the right turf grass selection and changing to electric equipment rather than a lot of our gas powered equipment. Another criticism for turf grass, and actually one of the main ones, is water consumption. It gets viewed negatively because we're using water not for human consumption, and it's kind of a luxury kind of crop or area. There is reports that if you do reduce irrigation far enough where you're getting dormant grass, you may reduce some of those environmental or ecosystem benefits I stated earlier. But we're doing a lot of research on this. There's a lot of solutions. So the first thing is to optimize your irrigation system. I do this probably twice a year to my own system, but check to make sure you don't have broken sprinklers. They're applying water where you should be applying it, so not on the sidewalks. Make sure your rain shutoff valve is actually working. We see, these have to be installed on buildings, but most of the time we don't see that they're actually functional. So make sure that works. There's a lot of irrigation technology coming out, so smart controllers, irrigation based off soil moisture sensors. There's also deficit irrigation strategies. And then just overall, our main recommendation is, only irrigate the turf when it needs it. So when it shows you signs of drought stress. One of the biggest things that we're doing now is turf grass selection or turf grass breeding. And so there's a lot of improved cultivars that are going to use less water than the older ones. So here's just some photos of some trials I just installed in the last month or so. And we're looking at soil amendments, so the rates and the different turf grass cultivars. So we're trying to see if there's a combination where we can actually have non-irrigated turf that gives us the quality of turf that we'll, want from our clientele. So the picture on the left, we're studying 20 different cultivars of grass, and we're trying to see which ones will hold up to no irrigation after establishment. The picture on the right, we're applying different rates of compost incorporation of the soil and seeing does that matter for non-irrigated turf or not. Another thing we're looking at is compost top dressing. My grad students looking at this, and hopefully within the next 6 months, we'll have some recommendations on whether or not you can reduce irrigation if you top dress your lawns. But I just want to point out that we do have a lot of research going on water. Water is always one of our main concerns. Another concern is the increase of nutrient and pesticide inputs. Like I've talked about before, proper application will result in minimal losses. This is also assuming that we're going to recycle our grass clippings. But we do need caution for applications on older grass systems, grasses that aren't growing, whether it's dormancy or damaged, and then making sure we're not applying anything to impervious surfaces. We have a ton of research on this. So like I said, already follow our recommendations. Fertilizer technology is improving. I do a lot of research on alternative fertilizer sources, turf grass selection, pick a grass that's going to allow you to apply less of these things. But then we're also improving the site-specific applications. So Dr. Pavel Patelovich, his grad student is looking at machine learning for herbicide application. And so they're developing a machine that can actually detect where the weeds are and only apply the herbicide to the weed and not to the whole area. So in the photo here, all these red areas where they are detecting a weed. So down the road, the herbicide would only be applied to these areas and not the whole area. I'm doing a lot of research on, can we use compost as a fertilizer source itself? We're finding that certain compost will release nutrients and can either replace or at least reduce fertilizer applications. So we're doing a lot of work with alternative fertilizer sources. I have a grad student that's actually looking at how fast the compost will break down. So when do we need to reapply a compost product? And then, like I said, I do a lot of research with alternative-based fertilizers. So this is a project using algae to clean wastewater, but then they have an algae byproduct. And so can we use that as a fertilizer source? And so this is a lot of the research that I'm doing. The next one is mowing. So this is, common practice. It's required for healthy turfgrass lawns. So this is going to increase cost and labor, the noise complaints, and then there's also emissions. So the solutions are low input grasses, ones you don't have to mow as often. Follow our mowing recommendations. But the biggest one we're kind of seeing in the market is a shift to electric and robotic mowers. So Dr. Unruh has done research on this. I have a lot of different areas in Citra using these. We found that they can effectively maintain our warm season grasses. And then they actually help with some of our stresses. So in this picture here, the dark green blocks, ones are plots that were mowed with the robotic mower. You can see it's retaining that green color into winter, compared to the traditional mower, which is, the brown, the grass going dormant itself. I'm also looking at, wear tolerance, scalping. So you can see the plots on the left were mowed with a traditional mower. The plots on the right were mowed with a robotic mower, and you can see the drastic difference in turf quality. And I think this is the last kind of concern, is pollinator-friendly habitat. And so because a lot of our turf grass is planted as a monoculture or just one cultivar, there's different solutions to increase, the biodiversity or pollinator friendly habitat. One is to increase natural areas. So you can see the two pictures here. This is a typical landscape that you'll get, but you can incorporate a lot of different plants into your own landscape. You can mow less frequently. You can avoid treating the weeds in your lawn if you're okay with them. A lot of weeds will flower, support pollinators. And then we're doing a lot of different research on, mixed species landscapes. So just to touch on them, what we're doing here, we're investigating perennial peanut and grass mixtures. So here's a picture of it. It can look really nice. And so it can provide dual benefits. Here's another one. Like I said, they're comparing mulch, turf, that peanut and grass to just a forb kind of ground cover. And so we are investigating, alternative kind of ground covers compared to turf grass. A new one that just has been started is looking at bahia grass, frog fruit, and white clover, and all the different mixes of these three, and seeing which one will provide a good quality lawn while getting additional benefits. So just to wrap up, turfgrass has numerous, environmental, social, economic benefits. So I think overall the benefits outweigh the negatives. There are some things that we can improve on. We're doing a lot of research on, lowering water consumption, lowering nutrient inputs, using more sustainable inputs. Also, looking at mixed species to increase pollinator habitat. So overall, turfgrass has a lot of benefits. And it's also a major contributor to our urban landscapes in terms of the functionality. So how we use our landscapes, the look of them. We have all those ecosystem services or environmental benefits that I touched on. It has a positive economic impact, whether we're looking at just general revenue bringing in, the job market, or even down to the homeowner. Their property value can increase, your sale price can increase. And then it also can improve people's overall well-being. Here's two references, or three references. If you're interested on getting more of a deep dive, looking at the specific research that we've looked at, here's three papers. So two of them are by Dr. Braun, looking at turfgrass, environmental protection and benefits, the strategies for reducing inputs and emissions in turfgrass. And then, like I said, I just published a paper going over a lot of the same material, but more in depth, actually looking at each individual study. So with that, I'd like to open up to any questions. I know I'm right at 1 o'clock here, but like I said, always feel free to reach out. I can provide Henry this PowerPoint too if he wants to distribute it. I know I covered a lot of material, so open to any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Lindsey. It's one or two, but the chat is full. There is a lot of concerns, pros and cons. Some people don't believe what you said. I mean, it's hard. It's a very hot topic. As I can imagine, the perception is sometimes bad in the industry. So I don't think we have the time to read all the comments over
Okay.
there. But what you can say if somebody told you that you know that grass is bad? I mean, I had this experience with my neighbor. I mean, with many people.
Yeah.
I got some colleagues, to be honest with you. I mean, say I don't believe the grass is good.
Yeah. So all of the stuff that I stated in this presentation was all published through peer-reviewed university research. Um, so I think, looking back at this, talk about a lot of the benefits, how it's one of the best filters that we have because of that root system. It provides functionality. If you manage it right, it doesn't have all of the inputs that a lot of people think it has. We have a lot of areas that we barely fertilize, barely water. They look great. But everyone has their own preference. If, your preference is a ground cover, a pollinator habitat, I think everybody's entitled to kind of getting what they want, as long as, your HOA allows it and everything. But some people really want their turf grass because they want to use it recreational, they want to play in it. So I think, I can provide, like I said, this presentation so you can go back and have a reference for where all the benefits are. But all the benefits are from peer-reviewed journals. And so I think they're all sound. Like I said, there is a lot more research that needs to be done still on comparing more different, environments. And so, overall, I think there's a lot of benefits. We still have a lot more to learn comparing it to other environments. So I guess that's kind of the general